Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for our midweek study in Daniel. I'm out of town later today, so I just wanted to record this for you and give you a little bit to think about until we meet again in person next week. So hope that's okay. We can follow along in Daniel chapter 3 and picking up with verse 26. Um, this is such a fantastic story of the miraculous power of God working in a pagan land in front of a pagan king with three Hebrew men who are very devoted to God. And of course, God allows them to come into this position. Nebuchadnezzar has them thrown into the fiery furnace. And so now, obviously, they were protected by God's angel. And the king comes to them and he comes to the mouth of the furnace. Again, we talked about the kilns and how big they were and the openings they had and the bellows of, stoking up the fire. And obviously, the king goes near the fire, not close enough that he's harmed, but he's able to call onto them, which again is kind of interesting. You would think this would be very, very loud, and the fire would be crackling and burning in such a way that sound would be difficult to be transmitted. But as we pick up in verse 26, Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the furnace. Again, the emphasis on burning fiery furnace, that triplicate of adjectives here, and spoke to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, called them servants of the Most High God. It's interesting as he still used their um, uh, Babylonian names. He did not call them by their Hebrew names. And so he calls out to them and he says, "Come out here." So what's interesting is they were not in any hurry to come out of the fire. Just trying to imagine what it was like, the sense of security that they must have felt in God's presence, protected from obvious death, that they were surviving in a realm of death. And to go from the anxiety of being thrown into the fire to the peace that they must have felt in the bottom of this furnace with God's presence there. Um, and okay, they were there for some period of time. What did they talk about anything? Was this a conversation going on? Were they worshiping God? What came upon them? Um, I can only imagine. And but yet it had to have been something where they had very peace, a lot of peace, and they weren't in a hurry to come out of the out of the furnace because it took time for the king to get there. And so they come out. They must have felt it was God's will to get for them to leave. It doesn't say what happened to the fourth person in the fire. Obviously not there any longer. Um, it's just, again, a incredible miracle. And of course, the king went with all of his higher ups in verse 7, takes the time to mention them by their titles. And then they saw, as they came out, just a beautiful commentary here, how the king's men saw those that had no power. The fire had no power on their bodies. Their hair was not singed. And I was looking at the progression of this. Okay, why did they mention hair being singed, garments being affected, and then no smell on them? You wonder if there's somewhat of a story within the story here. Hair being normally the first thing that's affected by fire. We've all had our hair singed by being too close to some sort of flame. Their garments were not singed. And their garments did not even smell of smoke or of fire. So just the level of protection that God afforded them is just brought out here in just a wonderful, wonderful way. And then we continue, we get to verse 28, and of course, Nebuchadnezzar has his change of heart again, begins to worship God and said, Barik, which is the word for blessed, be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. It does use the word malach or angel here, almost the same as in the Hebrew, and delivered his servants. It uses the word of da, which is again very the same in Hebrew for servants who trusted in him. This word trust is kind of interesting. I wanted to see if it was similar to the Hebrew. When we open that up in here, we find that it's related to the word to attend to. And I thought that was kind of interesting how they got the word trust out of this word rachatz, which comes to from bathing. So the etymology or base for this word is someone who is in a either a baby having someone washing them or attending to them, or it could have been someone in a royal court, like the when Pharaoh's daughter went down to wash, she had her servants there who were washing. It was attending, and I find that very interesting that that is used in the context of trusting. So there was something more going on here in this understanding of what it means to serve, what it means to be in a relationship with God, that we trust, but it's in a way of that we are attending upon God. So our trust is in a way of action. And I thought that was really kind of interesting to bring that out here because we don't always think of trusting as a action related, but here the king is definitely tying the uh, relationship that the Hebrew servants had into the action that they had probably from the beginning, from the diet that they chose, from their lifestyle that they had. It was all wrapped around in what their actions were displaying throughout their life that caused this event to uh, take place. And the king is bringing reference to that. And so the next I just want to show you where it talks about that in the Targumim here. It talks about it being to bathe or to wash. And of course, it expands it here in the Hifil form, which is what we're seeing, to bathe or to wash or to cleanse. Obviously, fire has a cleansing um, form to it, tied into the work of the Spirit being like a fire. So just all kinds of metaphors, all kinds of really neat things that God may speak to our hearts on this. Um, so after this, we look at the word yielded their bodies. I thought that was really kind of an interesting term of how the king looked at their service to God and that he was realizing that they were totally devoted, totally dedicated to God and not going to be swayed by the king and whatever the king's decree was. And so there's something very interesting here I want to look at in the Hebrew uh, text and what the commentators say in verse 28, it's about his servants trusted in him and have changed the king's word. And here they're saying that this word change really means to disobey or contradict the king's word. And so that was, I thought, very interesting how he understood what they were doing, civil disobedience. They knew what was right, but they chose to do what was right over the king's word. So the king then goes on his very noble proclamation and makes a decree that any people or language um, or nation that speaks against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I thought it was interesting that he used these three words. I can understand people, I can understand nation, but what does language have to do with that? And as I pondered that, it kind of made me think, well, maybe they're talking about the ethnic groups that could, because they did conquer a lot of different nations. And so even though they were living in Babylon, they still had their own identity in their ethnicity, kind of brought together by the language that they shared between them. And so he's looking at all these groups and subgroups within a group. And so speaking anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then he gives this very grandiose kind of proclamation that their houses shall be cut in pieces and they'll be made into an ash heap. So I had to take a look at that because this word cut has the word ibid in it again, which comes from the word to make or to prepare, which is the basis for the word to serve, or where the word slavery comes from, of work. And so where do they get the word cut? You know, it could have just been said that their houses would be made into something. And what is this something? Let's look at the word for ash. This is a strange word because it looks like the noon vav lamed would be pronounced aval, which is a word for vanity or foolishness in Hebrew. And so when we look that up, yes, it is still from the same root of Naval. Base word there is Nabal. Remember, he was the guy in the book of Kings that came. He was Abigail's husband who was foolish and came against David, and his name was called Nabal. And so this is that same word. So it's just very interesting on how the translators took this word for servant and took the word for foolish, but yet in the end result, their houses would be wasted and an effort would be um, making them into something that's foolish or non-useful would probably be another term that comes very close to that. So he makes this proclamation. He then promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What you're going to see here, very interesting, is that the chapter ends here in verse 30. And when we go to um, the Hebrew uh, scripture here, we see that it continues in verse 31, 33. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And he points out here that in the English versions, the chapters change and where the divisions change. So we're going to take that cue and we're going to stop here at verse 30 and come back next time to look at this beautiful poetry, this beautiful speech, this beautiful epitaph that Nebuchadnezzar makes here as we finish off the chapter. So God bless all of you. Take care. I hope you enjoyed this study, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.